Okay, what we'll do is I'll go ahead and call on people. So if you want to just raise your hand, and then we'll travel around with the microphone. So I saw right back there, about 4 rows back.
Getting my turn in first. I would be open to comments from anybody on the panel. As I listen and try to learn about these, and particularly with this issue of privatization of the water system, it sounds wonderful to say that we can work together as a region on our water system. My question comes with then, why cannot we work regionally on our transportation system? And I would submit that the answer is racism. It sounds like the arguments for privatization come from the aspect of business people. And I don't disparage business people totally. The arguments against privatization come from the very thing that we say we're concerned about, which is the taking away from we the people of our common good responsibilities, of our kind of freedom to choose. So we don't choose the water rates, but the whole idea of privatization just seems to strike against the very thing that, on the other hand, we are advocating for, which is we, the people, have a right to be involved in the decisions that affect our common good arena.
I'd like to jump in first on that.
Let me try. Transportation's difficult because we are a state in which all locales want to speak for themselves, and sometimes our councils don't interact very well. But more importantly, the cash either has to come from the federal government, which most of it does, and or from the guy who puts money in the pot. It doesn't pay for itself. The way that is different than water and sewerage is you can force people to pay your water bill. You know, basically you can turn it off, and it's not popular in any way. But if you believe that, as the guy who proudly said he was the far left of that water is a human right, I early in my career I did some work in Sri Lanka, and we were putting in a water system. It was the first water system. They didn't have a water system, and we were just putting up standpipes in the biggest city. It was very hard to convince the new people that they had to pay for pipes. They would argue, well, water comes from God and it should be free. And we would argue, well, it's free if you go catch it. But if we're going to put it in a pipe and bring it to your home, someone's got to pay for the pipe. When you take that the next step, it's what we're really talking about isn't whether someone's going to pay for that pipe. It's we know who's going to pay for that pipe. The ratepayers are going to pay for that pipe. It's who they're going to pay. Are they going to pay elected and appointed officials, or are they going to pay a private company? But once you have, once you're in charge of that water meter, you get to charge pretty much what you want to. The reason that the rates have been held down now is it's politically unpopular to raise rates, and you get to vote people out. When you have a private business, they don't, and with a 30-year contract, they're unlikely to worry too much about how popular their new rate increase is.
I think we got a lot of hands, so I think we'll just continue to move on. So maybe we'll go up here in the front. I think I saw this gentleman next.
I have just one question, but I have a comment too. I want to agree with the lady over there. In this region, and I've been here about 30 years, racism is a sport. Racism was the thing we talked about when the Lions were in the crapper. We didn't have anything else to do. It was a way of exploiting the natural relationships between the suburbs and the city. And it's a fact of life. And the fact that people want to soft pedal that is ridiculous. This is a racist area, I'm telling you that right now. And I live in the city. I'm demographically significant in my neighborhood. Not because I'm tall or bearded, but I'm demographically significant in my neighborhood. I've been there 30 years. I've seen it change. Nice neighborhood. Racism that makes this. Now, let me ask this question. Where privatization has been successful, is it because the privatizer has been able to leap quickly from not knowing much about the system to knowing a lot about the system? I administered construction for decades for the Water and Sewerage Department. And one of the models that we always would click on our heads was a simple one. Forming, storming, norming, performing. Forming meaning forming the construction management team, storming, trying to get over the hump of how the rules would work, forming based upon a set of rules, and then in the end, really working. Sometimes you tumble back down. But on our side, on the public side, that forming, storming, norming, performing was well understood. We knew how to run our business. The question I guess I have is where you have a privatized operation, do they fail or not succeed because they have never had the opportunity to form, storm, norm, and then perform? After 3 years or so, they still haven't got it right, and as a result, the fail.
Anyone speak to that? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this, and this is actually speaking from broader than just water privatization, but my organization looks at privatization in all different sectors. And I mean, the contracts that are successful, I mean, it's actually going, kind of referring back to what Dr. Sklar said. The contracts that we see that are successful, they are, they're a lot more short term. They have very defined, outcomes. There is a very, very high capacity at the public level to provide oversight. They're not kind of this wholesale privatization of a system, or of a road, or of a, of a social services system. It's very discrete projects. So, and what we see in these larger, very long-term privatization deals is that I don't know if it's so much of the norming, storming process that you described, but that there's always this tension between the public interest and then the profit motive. And so, when you're having these very long-term contracts, it's difficult to, it's difficult, if not impossible, for a private company to make the profit level that they want to make and always make decisions that are in the public's best interest.
Okay, maybe all the way in the back on the right side there.
Hi, my name is Elaine Wilson again. I'm always fascinated by the profit industry that sit in boardrooms and decide on what is it can we do next. Would you have millions of people in America, and then you say, well, can we take this away from the government? Okay, and the bottom line is just to make a profit. That's always fascinating to me with board of directors that decide on those kinds of issues. But it's always good to have people who are watchdogs watching the public sector in terms of what's happening. So if you're planning, my question I guess probably is, if you're thinking about privatizing public services, then what's the need of having public government? I mean, because they monitor the services and so forth. So, why even elect people? Just let the whole public-private sector take over everything. And then you wouldn't need any government. Okay? Then we'd be all in lines trying to get a ticket to get certain, whatever. I'm just, the whole business sector, it just seems to be focused in on one dynamic. Okay? Elected Americans that are elected to do a job is there for a reason, supposedly. Okay? For a reason. And so we as the public have to make sure that democracy stands. Okay? Because you cannot trust, in my opinion, you know, the business industry that really focus more on the profit as well as opposed to the public well-being. Okay? We need our elected officials, and I'm here to stand for responsible government, but our elected officials to make sure that we get what we need to get. Education is disrupted because of private sector coming in to do whatever, the private colleges versus the public colleges. Big competition going on. So, I mean, when is it going to ever stop? That's the question.
And I think there's a lot there with questions of ownership and then also questions of governance. And I think the panel's hit on both those if anyone has anything to add. But I mean, there's all, the question of who owns the system and who also administers the system. And I think we'll go back on this side. Here in the back right there.
Yeah, to add what she just said, what happens to the Freedom of Information Act, where you have a right to demand facts, and once it's privatized, it limits our ability to find out what's happening. I think that's a key thing. I've got a friend, Saul Plofkin. He's the head of the chemical engineers in the water department. Now, it used to be, I think 35% of the revenue coming into the water department was used to pay off the bonds. And now it's, I think, up to 50. I might be wrong on this. Correct me if I am. But also, there were billions of dollars spent on these retention ponds to stop the sewage overflow when there's storms. And that has proven not to work, which people told them before they ever started making them that it wasn't going to work. And it doesn't work, maybe 5%. And so what would have been, according to him, a better use of the money would have been to actually repipe the city and put another pipe going to everybody's home and another pipe. So you've got separate sewer and separate, drain water. But these decisions were partly made because of the Piken thing, and he was telling us what to do, and he told us the wrong stuff, obviously. But when I see, I work for public lighting and recreation department both, but Danny, when I was in public lighting, the lamp room, he was cable splicer. He got to be one while I was still there. And I saw him out on the street a couple of years ago, and if it hadn't, he had been hired by Motor City Electric. And if it weren't for him, they wouldn't know what they were doing, probably. So, and when I was working in the lamp room, it was dangerous because the contractors would do stuff to cut corners. And I think it's really a mistake to, and for instance here, I've had a water problem. The only way I get any is I go down to the board meeting. Then they do something. But for 15 years, I knocked my head trying to go against the wall, trying to go to their office. But when I figured out to go to the board meeting, then they started doing stuff. But I had to go out and pay somebody to tap the main water main, and that guy didn't even tap it right. It would leak for 2 years. They should be tapping their own main, and instead of giving all this work to contractors that don't know what they're doing, and actually cause water leakage and building damage.
Okay, and I think, do we have time for about one more question? Yeah, one more question. I think this gentleman up in the green shirt here.
I think the size of the system, as you indicated, I've worked at the wastewater treatment plant downriver, and also at the Connor Creek pumping station. And I've been in that basin down below and how big it is. Most of the system is underground. Most people don't know what's there and how big and intricate it is until there's a water main break and a sinkhole forms, and then they can go and complain to the city. They can go and complain to the city council, the mayor's office, the water board, and get something done about that. But when you've got corporation running it and they're only responsible to their shareholders, those shareholders don't live anywhere near where those sinkholes are going to be. So they're not going to be able to, nobody's going to be able to go to that shareholder meeting and say, look, there's a sinkhole in my neighborhood, come and fix it. It would probably be easier to make it people understand how significant and how much of a sell-off it would be to get to privatize this if the whole system was above ground. They'd see it start leaking years before the big holes came out. So how do you get people to understand how big of a system and how complex it is and how important it is that it is maintained in public control?
John, can you maybe touch on just public outreach, that type of thing, awareness about the system at all?
That's probably one of the biggest challenges we have because it's not a sexy issue. Tell people the reason I changed the name to Water Resources Commissioner is because I get less toilet jokes now. But you make a very good point. People really do not realize the magnitude of the underground infrastructure. And of course, out of sight, out of mind, when it does come to replacement, refurbishment, maintaining it, people just don't understand the complexity and the cost associated with that. This industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Ultimately, a lot of these systems were put into place when feds provided upwards of 80% of the funding. Those funds don't exist today, so as things have to be replaced and refurbished, it falls to the ratepayers. All this controversy that we've heard over the course of the past few years about mismanagement of Detroit's system, indictments, et cetera, those are all important issues. They have to be rectified, and they do have a financial impact, but nothing compared to what it's going to cost us in terms of maintaining and refurbishing the system. So when people say, gee, now that we've cleaned the mess up, are we going to see relief on our rates? I say absolutely not. We're going to continue to see rates rise.
Okay, and I think we do have to cut it off now, I'm told. But one parting shot is that we have excellent water here in the Detroit system, so make sure you use that tap all the time and fill up a reusable container, and that's the best thing you can do for the environment, and to make some money.